My name is Elizabeth, but everyone calls me Beth. Chicago has been my city since childhood, and my morning walks through familiar streets always gave me a sense that everything was in its rightful place. The morning was clear, and the air smelled fresh after the night's rain. I was headed to my favorite cafe, the Lincoln Spot, located not far from Lincoln Park. It was my sanctuary. Cozy, peaceful, the perfect place to start the day right. Stepping inside, I ordered my usual, an Americano with oat milk. The barista nodded at me, already knowing my order, as he did every morning. I sat by the window, slowly sipping my coffee, watching the world wake up. The city felt alive, yet calm, like the ocean before a storm. Suddenly, a sharp jolt interrupted my usual rhythm. I flinched as my cup tumbled onto the table, spilling hot coffee everywhere. Oh, damn, sorry, Beth. The voice was familiar, and I looked up to see Jason, my boyfriend Alex's friend. Jason looked just as startled as I was. His light hair was slightly tousled, and his face showed genuine regret. We had crossed paths a few times at parties and gatherings, but we never really talked much. He was one of those guys who always seemed nice but a little absent-minded. It's okay, I smiled, though inside I was a mix of irritation and surprise. Just one of those mornings. He immediately began apologizing and offered to buy me a new coffee. I didn't resist. Several meetings awaited me throughout the day, and an extra dose of caffeine wouldn't hurt. A few minutes later, he returned with a fresh cup and sat down next to me. "So, how are you?" he asked, trying to make conversation, though I could tell he still felt awkward. "I think I almost ruined your morning ritual." I smirked. "Don't worry, I needed a reason to wake up fully anyway." "And you? I heard you moved recently." "Yeah, I rented a place near Grant Park," Jason said, looking a little more lively. "It's a nice spot, but I'm still settling in. You know, moving is always chaos." Our conversation stalled for a moment, and I wondered if I should continue it. What started as a routine morning coffee had turned into an odd but not entirely unpleasant encounter. When Jason unexpectedly suggested grabbing coffee again sometime, I nearly choked on my Americano. Thanks, but I've got a pretty packed schedule right now," I replied with a polite smile, trying not to make things awkward. Alex was set to leave for San Diego for 3 months to work on a startup, and while I had supported him from the very beginning, I couldn't shake the unease growing inside me. This project was an incredible opportunity for him, and I understood he couldn't pass it up. We had talked about it a lot. I tried to stay strong, but the closer we got to his departure, the more this strange feeling of anxiety gnawed at me. That morning, Alex picked me up to drive me to the station. He looked focused and calm, as he always did before big moments in life. We talked about trivial things, avoiding the real subject. What would happen when he wasn't around? I didn't want him to sense my anxiety, though with every passing minute, it became harder to hide. 3 months will fly by, he said confidently as we pulled up to the station. "You know I'll call every day." "I know," I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, everything was tightening. We stood on the platform amidst the crowd, and I felt a lump forming in my chest. Alex hugged me tightly, and for a moment, that embrace gave me reassurance. But as soon as he let go, I felt the emptiness return. "I'll be back before you even have a chance to miss me." He winked, but I knew something was off. This didn't feel like a regular goodbye. His words lacked the usual lightness I had come to expect. "Just don't take too long," I joked, though my heart felt heavy. The train started to move. Alex waved goodbye and then disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, watching the train pull away, and suddenly felt a cold gust of wind. It was as if something had shifted, as if this wasn't just a temporary separation, but the beginning of something bigger. I returned home alone, with the unsettling feeling that something about this farewell wasn't right. After Alex left, life fell into a strange rhythm. My workdays at the architecture firm completely consumed me, and I desperately tried to use that as a way to distract myself. Each day was filled with endless meetings, blueprints, and project discussions, but it all felt like I was on autopilot. and in those rare moments when I was alone, my eyes kept drifting to my phone. At first, Alex did call every day, just as he had promised. But the conversations became shorter, colder, as if the connection that once bound us was no longer there. We talked about his project, about how things were progressing with the startup, but it was all just facts. There was no emotional depth. More and more often, I found myself hanging up the phone with a sense of disappointment. One evening, after yet another long day at work, I decided to take a walk through Grant Park to clear my head. As I passed by a newly opened gallery, I noticed that it had just opened. The decision was spontaneous. I stepped inside. Art had always helped me unwind when I needed to gather my thoughts, and this time it felt like exactly what I needed. The gallery was quiet, only the soft whispers of other visitors and the echo of footsteps on the parquet floor breaking the silence. I slowly moved from one painting to the next, trying to focus on the colors and shapes, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Alex. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. Beth, did you also decide to recharge with some art? It was Jason. He stood there, looking just as slightly scattered as he had that day in the cafe, but with a surprising air of focus. Oh, hi, I said, feeling a flicker of surprise. Yeah, I just needed a distraction. What about you? I'm really into art. I don't often get the chance, but when I found out this exhibit was opening, I couldn't resist. His face lit up with a warm smile. I nodded, feeling a bit awkward. This wasn't the Jason I thought I knew, the friend of my boyfriend. It seemed like there was more behind that absent-minded exterior, a deeper side to him. Maybe we can look around together? He suggested, and without much thought, I agreed. We wandered among the paintings, discussing the different works, and his passion for art turned out to be so infectious that for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely engaged. It was a moment when reality seemed to fade away, and I was simply enjoying the present. After that gallery walk, I didn't expect Jason to become anything more than just an acquaintance. But life has a way of throwing unexpected twists. In the following days, we started running into each other more often, and our meetings became spontaneous. On city streets, in cafes where I used to sit alone, or by chance while walking through the park. It all began innocently. One evening, when I decided to take a walk through Chicago to clear my head, my phone rang. It was Jason. Hey, Beth. I'm nearby, walking around the observatory. Are you around? Maybe we could go for a walk? His voice was lively and casual. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. We met half an hour later and started strolling through the city streets, lit by the bright lights of the evening. Jason told me he had been fascinated by the history of architecture for a while, something I hadn't known about him. Did you know this area used to be an industrial zone? He said, pointing to a row of old buildings. Now it's one of the most elite parts of the city. History is always about transformation, just like with cities and with people. His words made me pause for a moment. How often do we change without even realizing it? Chicago, a city I thought I knew so well, was revealing itself to me from a new perspective through his stories. Jason spoke as if he knew every street, every brick, and every tale behind them. We talked about books we had read, movies we planned to watch, about the things that inspired us. For the first time in a long while, I felt energized by a conversation with someone. Jason wasn't as shallow as he had seemed at first glance. He turned out to be a thoughtful conversationalist, someone who knew how to keep a discussion going without being intrusive. You know, when Alex left, I thought I'd handle it just fine, I confessed during one of our walks. But with each passing day, it's been getting harder. That's normal, he replied calmly. Distance always tests relationships, but the most important thing is to be honest with yourself. His words were simple, but there was a truth in them that I had been afraid to admit. I couldn't ignore the fact that my friendship with Jason was becoming something more than just random meetings. With each new encounter, I felt more and more like he was filling a space that used to belong to Alex. But I was still loyal to my feelings and knew I couldn't just betray my relationship with Alex. A month had passed since Alex left. We still exchanged messages and occasionally talked on the phone, but those conversations were becoming more formal, stripped of the emotions that once fueled our chats. In this new reality, I felt slightly lost, as if caught between two lives, unsure of which direction to move forward. One evening, I received an invitation to a party from our mutual friend, Tom. At first, I hesitated, wondering if I should go. These kinds of events hadn't appealed to me much, especially in the last few weeks. But maybe a little distraction would be good. So, without thinking too much, I decided to attend. When I walked into Tom's apartment, the atmosphere immediately pulled me in. Music, laughter, conversations, and the gentle clinking of glasses filled the space. It was a typical party where everyone was trying to escape the everyday grind. As I made my way through the crowd, exchanging greetings with friends and familiar faces, someone waved at me from across the room. It was Jason. He was standing with a group of friends, holding a glass of wine and enthusiastically telling a story. His face lit up with a smile, and when our eyes met, he walked over to me. "You made it," he said, his voice full of excitement, and I couldn't help but smile back. "I thought it'd be hard to get you to come to one of these." "Yeah, I decided I could use a change of scenery," I replied, trying to sound calm, though I felt a slight tension inside. Recently, my encounters with Jason had become more frequent, and I was starting to notice something within myself that I wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. The evening went on. I mingled with friends, sipped wine, and for a while I managed to push my thoughts aside. But when the music quieted down, Jason approached me again. This time, his expression was more serious. "Want to take a walk?" he asked unexpectedly. "There's an amazing view of the city from the rooftop." I hesitated for a moment, but feeling like we needed to talk, I agreed. We climbed a narrow staircase to the roof, and before us, the incredible view of nighttime Chicago unfolded. The city lights twinkled in the distance, creating a sense of infinity, while the breeze gently refreshed the air. "You know, Beth," he began, his voice soft, almost lost in the night air. "I've wanted to tell you for a while. You've become more than just a friend to me." My thoughts scrambled. I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I was surprised, though deep down, perhaps I had anticipated this. But his words still caught me off guard. I stood there, staring at the glowing cityscape, feeling my heart race, and remained silent. "I know this might be unexpected," he continued, sensing my silence. "But over the past few months, I've realized that I want to get to know you on a deeper level. I can't ignore that." Finally, I gathered the courage to look him in the eyes. Jason stood in front of me, his face tense, but in his eyes I saw sincerity and hope. My heart was racing, and I couldn't find the words. It felt as though this moment hung between us, pulling me apart. I realized that over the past few weeks, my encounters with Jason had stopped being random. But how could I admit that when Alex was still in my life? "Jason," I said softly, trying to gather my thoughts. "You've become important to me too, but—" I trailed off, the words not coming as easily as I wanted them to. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on mine, and the tension between us was almost tangible. I took a deep breath, summoning all the courage I had to continue. I can't just set aside my feelings for Alex. We've been together for so long, and despite the distance, I still love him, I said, trying to be honest, though inside I was overwhelmed by uncertainty. Jason nodded silently. His face remained calm, but I saw a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "I understand," he finally said. He stepped closer and gently kissed me. "I'll be here, Beth," he said quietly. "Don't rush your decision. Just know that I'm willing to wait." In the days that followed, I tried to avoid Jason. I needed space to figure things out, to understand which feelings were real. I buried myself in work, hoping to drown out all the emotions swirling inside me. At the same time, I began searching for a way to reconnect with Alex, to restore the closeness that had started to fade. 2 months later, Alex returned to Chicago for the weekend. I was both excited and nervous. We hadn't seen each other for so long, and I thought this visit might be a chance to restore our connection. But alongside the joy of his return, there was anxiety in my heart. I couldn't ignore the fact that my feelings had changed. That weight had been hanging over me ever since Jason confessed his feelings. The day after the party, I met Jason for coffee. It had already become a routine for us, meeting at our favorite cafe or taking walks around Chicago. But today felt different. A storm of emotions brewed inside me, and I knew this conversation would be a turning point. We sat on the rooftop, taking in the view of the city. Jason was calm, as always. His presence had a strange, soothing effect on me. But today, I couldn't relax. I gazed at the lights as if hoping they'd give me answers to the questions swirling in my mind. "You seem tense," Jason said, breaking the silence. "Is something wrong?" I sighed and looked at him. At that moment, everything inside me screamed for honesty. I couldn't stay in this state of uncertainty any longer. The situation with Alex and the rumors at work only made things worse. "Jason, I need to tell you something," I began, feeling the weight of my words pressing down on my chest. "You've become an important part of my life, and I truly appreciate how close we've grown over the past few months. But I still haven't figured things out for myself." Jason listened carefully, his face calm, but I could tell he understood where this conversation was headed. "I love Alex, or at least a part of me is still attached to the feelings we once had," I continued. "But after he left, so much changed. I've been confused, and maybe I let my feelings for you develop more than they should have." He nodded without interrupting, giving me the space to express my thoughts. "I've decided to let Alex go." "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, not wanting to pressure me but understanding the gravity of the moment. "Yes," I said, gathering my strength. "I've made the decision. Both Alex and I understand that our breakup is inevitable. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to jump into something new right away. I can't rush into another relationship until I figure myself out." Jason was silent for a moment, then gently took my hand in his. "I understand, Beth. And I'm not in any rush. I just want you to be happy. If you need time to work through things, take it. I'll be here." His words touched my heart. In that moment, I felt a deep gratitude for his understanding, but also the weight of responsibility. We sat there in silence for a long time, taking in the view and the feeling that a new chapter of my life had begun. The next day, I wrote Alex a letter. I couldn't bring myself to say everything in person, but I had to be honest. We both knew we had reached this point naturally, and that we needed to let each other go. Alex didn't reply right away, but I knew he would understand. We both deserved better. After the breakup with Alex, I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. It had been a difficult but necessary decision. We both knew that our journey had come to an end, and while our goodbye left a trace of sadness, it also freed me for a new chapter in life. Now I needed to figure out who I was and what I truly wanted. Jason and I continued to see each other, but things were different now. He didn't pressure me, nor did he demand any answers about his feelings. His support was quiet and unobtrusive, and for that I was deeply grateful. We met as we always did, but without the tension that used to hang between us. I realized that a new story could be possible between us, but first I needed to find my footing within myself. The first few weeks after the breakup, I threw myself into work. The architectural projects I was working on became my way to distract myself and regain balance. I poured all my energy into them, and it began to pay off. One of my projects received approval from the management, which boosted my self-esteem. I started feeling in control of my life again. "You're doing great, Beth," my boss said one day during a meeting about a new project. "I can see how much you've grown over the past few months." Those words filled me with pride and confidence. Life was indeed moving forward, and with each day, I felt myself recovering from everything that had happened. One evening, while walking home through Lincoln Park, I ran into Jason again. We hadn't planned to meet. It just happened, as it had many times before. He was carrying a book in his hand, and when he saw me, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Hey," he said, stopping next to me. "How's it going?" "Everything's good," I replied, and it was true. We sat on a bench by the lake and began to talk like old friends. I felt a sense of ease while talking to him. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to hide my feelings or try to figure out what was going on inside me. Everything just felt right. "You know," I said, looking at him, "I think for the first time in a while, I'm starting to feel whole again." Jason looked at me, his eyes full of understanding and calm. "I'm glad to hear that, Beth," he replied softly. "I didn't want to rush you. What matters most to me is that you're happy. Whatever you choose." We fell silent, simply enjoying the peace around us. I watched the reflection of the city lights in the water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that everything would be okay. This wasn't the end of the story yet, but I was ready to embrace whatever awaited me. Life continued. Yes, I was no longer with Alex, but that chapter had come to a natural close. I knew that, perhaps, there was a future with Jason, but I wasn't in a rush. It was important for me to find inner harmony before starting something new. And there I was, sitting on a bench, looking at the city I loved so much, realizing that there were still so many possibilities ahead of me. A new chapter was just beginning. Weeks turned into months, and life gradually found its rhythm again. The days were filled with work, projects, and moments of quiet reflection. I felt stronger, more centered, and more in tune with who I was. The city I loved so much had become a backdrop for my transformation, a reminder that, like Chicago itself, I was constantly evolving. Jason and I continued to meet regularly, and the once awkward tension between us had dissolved into something natural and comfortable. We would spend evenings discussing art, walking through the streets, or sitting by the lake, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. There was no pressure, no need to define what we were. It was a slow and steady process, and I appreciated that more than anything. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself back at the Lincoln spot. The familiar atmosphere wrapped around me like an old friend, and I realized how much had changed since the last time I had sat there feeling uncertain about my future. As I sipped my Americano, Jason walked in, just like he always seemed to do at the right moment. He spotted me by the window, smiled, and walked over. "Mind if I join?" he asked, already pulling out a chair. "Of course," I smiled. It felt so easy now, so simple to share space with him without the burden of unspoken words weighing us down. We sat in silence for a while, watching the people outside go about their lives, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey I had been through. The doubts and fears, the goodbyes, and the new beginnings. They had all led me to this moment where I felt content, not just with Jason, but with myself. "Beth," Jason said quietly, breaking the silence. "You seem different these days. Happier." I looked at him and nodded. "I think I am. It's been a long road, but I feel like I've finally found my balance." He smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "I'm glad. You deserve that." As we talked, I realized something important. Happiness wasn't about having all the answers or making the right choices all the time. It was about accepting the uncertainty, embracing the process of growth, and allowing life to unfold at its own pace. Jason and I didn't rush anything. There was no need for labels or grand declarations. What mattered was that we were there for each other, that we both understood the importance of letting things develop naturally. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, I knew that whatever came next, whether with Jason, in my career, or in life itself, I was ready. I had learned to trust the journey, to embrace the unknown, and to move forward with an open heart. A new chapter had begun, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Instead, I was excited. Excited for the endless possibilities, the challenges, and the joy that awaited me. Life, after all, was just beginning.